She walked into his study uninvited, set a tray of tea directly in front of a man who had not asked for it, and watched him reach precisely to the wrong side of the desk to find it. Without a word, she moved the cup 6 inches to his left. His hand found it immediately. He went still. Then, very quietly, he said, "You moved it." She said, "You were about to knock it onto your correspondence." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "My wife has been here 4 hours and she has already decided I require management." She sat down across from him. "Your Grace, I have decided no such thing. I simply prefer dry letters to wet ones." Before we begin, subscribe to the Duke's Diary and stay with this story until the very end. Leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to know exactly how far this story has traveled. The wedding had taken 11 minutes. Eleanor Ashford counted them. Not because she was impatient, she had learned, in 26 years of a life that required patience, the way a river requires a channel, to wait without showing that she was waiting. She counted because it was something to do with her hands, while every person in St. Clement's Church watched her walk toward a man she had met exactly once, for exactly 20 minutes, in a drawing room that smelled of old wood and her father's nervous perspiration. Duke Adrian Whitmore did not watch her walk toward him. He stood at the front of the church, with his hands clasped behind his back, and his face arranged in the controlled stillness of a man accustomed to being observed and utterly indifferent to the experience. He was taller than she had realized in the drawing room, where he had been seated, and he held himself with the kind of posture that comes not from vanity, but from years of understanding that a man of his position is always, in some sense, on display. His dark coat was immaculate. His cravat was tied with mathematical precision. His eyes were hidden behind a pair of dark-tinted glasses. This was the detail everyone discussed in whispers. The accident 4 years ago that had taken his sight. The Duke of Whitmore, they said, who had once been the most formidable man in the county, sharp-eyed, decisive, the kind of nobleman who noticed everything and forgot nothing, reduced to darkness. Dependent, diminished. Eleanor had listened to these whispers at 3 separate dinner tables in the 6 weeks between the announcement of the engagement and the morning of the wedding, and she had filed them carefully in the part of her mind where she kept information that required closer examination before she decided what to think of it. She had noticed in that single drawing-room meeting that the Duke's hands did not shake, that he found the arm of his chair without feeling for it, that when her father's solicitor moved a document across the table, the Duke reached for it and placed his fingers on it with the confident accuracy of a man who knew exactly where things were. She had not mentioned this to anyone. She had simply watched and thought and walked toward the altar on the morning of the 14th of October and counted 11 minutes and become a duchess. Whitmore Hall was everything she had been told it was, and nothing she had expected. The house was enormous, which she had expected. It had the weight of centuries in its walls, which she had expected. The staff was efficient, silent, and moved through the corridors with the practiced invisibility of people who understood that their presence was necessary and their personalities were not, which she had also, to some degree, expected. What she had not expected was the quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a house at rest. Something different, something that had the quality of a place where noise had been deliberately discouraged for a long time, until the silence itself became a habit. Doors were closed that should have been open. Curtains were drawn against perfectly good afternoon light. The dining room, when Thomas Hale, the estate manager, a compact man with clever eyes and the efficient manner of someone who did everything competently and said nothing unnecessarily, showed her through it, had the particular stillness of a room that was maintained but not used. "His Grace takes meals in his study," Thomas said, anticipating the question she had not yet asked. "It has been his preference for some time, I see," Eleanor said. Thomas looked at her with a brief assessing expression that told her he was deciding how much to say. "His Grace is particular about his routines," he said finally. "He finds the adjustment to new arrangements somewhat difficult, deliberate," Thomas said, with careful precision. "He does not struggle, Miss Your Grace. He simply requires that things be as he expects them." Eleanor thought about the cup of tea. She thought about a man who navigated his entire house, his entire life, by memorizing the precise location of everything. She thought about what it would mean to someone like that when a stranger arrived and began moving the furniture. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "I will find my way." He looked at her again, the same brief, assessing look, and then something in his expression settled. "Yes," he said quietly, "I believe you will." She went to the study at 4 o'clock, not because she had been invited. Not because the schedule Thomas had outlined suggested it. She went because she had unpacked her 2 trunks, placed her books on the shelves of the room they had given her, arranged her writing desk the way she preferred it, and concluded that sitting alone in a wing of the house while her husband sat alone in a different wing was exactly the kind of marriage she had agreed to avoid. Her father had been specific, in the conversation they had 2 weeks before the wedding, about what she was agreeing to. "It will not be a love match," he had said, which was not news. "It will not be a companionable match either, most likely. The Duke as he has had a difficult few years, Eleanor. He is not the man he was before the accident. He has become." Her father paused, reaching for a word and rejecting several before settling on solitary. "Most men of his position are solitary," Eleanor had said. Not in this way. Her father had looked at her with the expression he wore when he was trying to prepare her for something she would have to face without him. He has had 4 governesses for his ward in the past 3 years. Every one of them left within 2 months, 3 housekeepers. His previous social secretary resigned in writing and did not return for her reference. What did he do? Nothing that could be formally complained about. He expects things to be exactly as he arranged them. And when they are not, he does not become angry. He simply becomes impossible, thorough, her father said in his displeasure. Eleanor had considered this. "I am not a housekeeper or a governess." "No, but you will be living in his house, managing his household, and existing in his space. And I want you to understand clearly what that will require." "What it will require," Eleanor said, "is that I pay attention." Her father had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had nodded, slowly, the nod of a man who had raised an intelligent daughter and had the good sense to trust her. She knocked twice on the study door firmly, not tentatively, and opened it without waiting for an answer. This was a calculated decision. A timid knock followed by anxious waiting communicated one kind of woman. 2 deliberate knocks followed by entering communicated another. She was the second kind, and he would learn it now, or learn it later, and she preferred now. The study was the opposite of the rest of the house. Every surface was occupied. Correspondence organized in stacks whose apparent disorder she recognized, after a moment, as a system. Books on the shelves with their spines aligned with the precision of a man who could not see the titles and therefore needed everything in exactly its expected place. A large desk positioned at precise distance from the window. Papers weighted with identical small stones so they would not shift if a door opened quickly. Adrian Whitmore sat at the desk. He did not look up when she entered, which she noted, because it told her something. Not rudeness, something different. The careful focus of a man who had learned to complete each task before allowing himself to be interrupted, because interruption for him was more costly than for other men. She crossed to the small side table where a tea service had been left, placed a cup and poured it, carried it to the desk, and set it directly in front of him. He reached to the right. The cup was on his left. She moved it 6 inches to his left. His hand found it immediately, curved around it, and went completely still. "You moved it," he said. The voice was not what she had prepared herself for. Low, unhurried, with the quality of someone who had learned to communicate in tone rather than volume. She had expected coldness. This was not cold, it was contained. Carefully. "You were about to knock it onto your correspondence," she said. The papers looked important. A pause. She could feel him assessing her, the specific attention of someone who could not rely on sight and had therefore developed every other sense to a considerably heightened degree. "My wife has been here 4 hours," he said, "and she has already decided I require management." "Your Grace, I have decided no such thing." She sat down in the chair across the desk, uninvited. The chair had not been positioned for a visitor, it was angled against the wall, clearly its default storage position. She moved it herself, carried it to the desk, sat. She heard his attention shift at the sound of the scraping. "I simply prefer dry letters to wet ones." Another pause. "Longer you moved that chair," he said. "I did. It belongs against the wall." "It is less useful there." Silence. She could not see his expression clearly through the dark glasses. but she could see the set of his jaw, and the jaw was doing something, not anger, not offense, something she classified, tentatively, as recalibration. The specific stillness of someone encountering a response that did not match their prediction. "What is your name?" he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Your name, your full name." We were not formally introduced at the ceremony. This was true. The solicitors had managed everything. The drawing room meeting 3 weeks ago had been brief and largely conducted between the men in the room. She had given her name to the vicar, not to him. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Margaret Ashford. As of this morning, Whitmore." "Eleanor," he repeated, not with particular warmth. Simply filing it. "My family is." "I have been in London for the past 2 years. Doing what?" "Working," she said, and watched the slight angle of his chin, the movement of a man redirecting his attention. "I managed correspondence and accounts for a publishing house on Fleet Street. Before that, I helped my aunt run her household after her husband died. I am accustomed to managing systems that other people have left in incomplete states." The silence that followed was not the silence of a man who had nothing to say. It was the silence of a man deciding which of several possible responses to use. "You are describing my household," he said. "I am describing my experience," she said. "Whether it applies here is something I will need time to determine." He set down his pen. She had not noticed, until that moment, that he had been holding one, that he had been working while she spoke, as though her presence did not require his full attention. The act of setting it down was, she understood immediately, a significant concession. "What do you want?" he said. "Not here in this study at 4 o'clock on my wedding day. I mean in general, from this arrangement." The question was blunt in a way she appreciated. Not unkind, just efficient, a man who had no patience for the social performance of indirection. "Honesty," she said, "about what this house needs and what you are willing to accept. I have been told a number of things about you, most of them by people who have not met you. I prefer to form my own conclusions. And what conclusions have you formed in 4 hours?" "Only one," she said, "that you have arranged everything in this house to function without you needing assistance, and you have done it so thoroughly that you have also, as a result, arranged for yourself to be entirely alone." The jaw again, the recalibration. "That is very perceptive," he said, "for 4 hours." "I pay attention," she said simply. She moved the chair back against the wall when she left. Not because he asked her to, he didn't, but because she had made her point, and she understood the difference between establishing herself and being deliberately provocative. She was not there to dismantle his systems. She was there to understand them well enough that they could eventually exist alongside hers. She found Thomas Hale in the corridor and asked him 3 specific questions: where the household accounts were kept, when the staff received their weekly instructions, and whether there was a room with sufficient light for her to use as a workspace. Thomas answered all 3 with the precise, efficient quality she was beginning to understand as his personal characteristic, and then he paused and said, "May I ask, Your Grace, how was he?" She looked at him. "Direct," she said, "which I prefer." Thomas's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, a settling, like a question being answered. "Yes," he said, "he is that. He is also being watched very carefully by everyone in this house," she said, not unkindly. "And I imagine he knows it." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "He is aware of a great deal more than people assume," he said carefully. "I know," Eleanor said. "That is what I am counting on." Dinner that first evening was the strangest meal she had eaten in recent memory. And she had once eaten a formal dinner in a Fleet Street office, with a publisher who communicated exclusively through written notes, even when seated 3 feet from the person he was addressing. She had sent word, through Thomas, that she would join the Duke for dinner in his study if he preferred not to use the dining room. The reply delivered by Thomas, in the tone of a man who found himself mildly surprised, was that His Grace would receive her at 7. She arrived at 7, not 6:59, not 7:02. 7, the study had been arranged for 2. She could see, from the positions of the plates and glasses, that someone, Thomas, almost certainly had placed her setting on the left side of the small table that had been cleared for the purpose, and the Duke's on the right. The placement was careful and correct. She sat. He was already seated, because he had been there first, and she understood that this was not dominance but practicality. He needed to know where everything was before the meal began. and he needed to have arranged it himself. For the first 10 minutes they ate in silence. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had not yet found their register with each other, which was different from hostility and different from indifference. It was simply absence of established rhythm. Then he said, "Without preamble, you have a question." "Several," she said. "Which one would you like?" The corner of his mouth moved. She caught it barely in the candlelight. The most direct one. What happened to the four governesses? The silence that followed was brief and specific. He cut a piece of bread with the precision of someone for whom every movement at a table is deliberate and memorized. They rearranged things, he said. She waited. The third one, he paused. She moved a chair in the east corridor. I walked into the wall at approximately 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The resulting bruise was not in itself significant. What was significant was that I had trusted the corridor to be as I remembered it, and it was not. "So you dismissed her?" I asked her to restore the chair. She did, and then 2 days later rearranged it again, apparently having forgotten. He set down his knife. She had not understood that for me, the position of a chair is not an aesthetic preference. It is the difference between moving through my house with confidence and moving through it with fear. Eleanor set down her own fork, and when she rearranged it the second time, "I wrote her a reference," he said, "and I asked Thomas to find someone else." Without explaining why, she had been told once, a brief pause. "I am not accustomed to explaining myself twice. That," Eleanor said, "is the problem." He turned toward her, the precise, deliberate movement of a man aligning his attention. "I beg your pardon," expecting people to understand, without adequate explanation, something that is entirely outside their experience, she said. "You told her not to move the chair. You did not tell her what moving the chair meant. To her, a chair moved back to where it was is a correction made. To you, it is the second occurrence of the same threat. She had no way to understand that those are different things unless you explained the difference." He was very still, and the result, Eleanor continued, keeping her tone entirely even, is that you have spent 4 years dismissing every person who tried to help you because you refused to tell them what help actually required. Which leaves you here, managing an enormous house, alone very efficiently and entirely without company. The silence was longer this time. She had spoken plainly because she had determined in the drawing room and the study and the 4 hours of watching this house before she had entered it, that plain speaking was the only currency this man would accept. Anything softer would be discarded. Anything evasive would be recognized immediately and filed as dishonesty. He was quiet for long enough that she began to wonder if she had miscalculated. Then he said, "You are remarkably comfortable telling a duke he is wrong." "I am remarkably comfortable telling anyone they are wrong," she said. "When they are." Another pause. "And you are certain I am wrong?" "I am certain that your method of managing your condition has been effective at keeping people at a distance, and very ineffective at everything else you presumably wanted from a household." She picked up her fork again. "The two things are related." He looked at her. She had begun to understand what it meant when his face turned toward her, that he was directing every sense he had at the space she occupied, that the looking was real, even if it worked differently than sight. "What do I presumably want? A house that functions. People who can be trusted, routines that don't require constant vigilance to maintain." She paused. "Probably other things as well, but those are the ones I can help with." Silence. "Then you are very confident for someone who arrived 4 hours ago." "I am confident in the things I know," she said. "I know households. I know accounts and systems and the management of complicated situations. I don't yet know you, or your preferences in full, or what the last 4 years have been. Those I will learn if you are willing to tell me. And if I am not willing, then I will learn them another way," she said pleasantly, "and it will simply take longer." The corner of his mouth moved again, more definitively this time. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the architecture of one, the structure beneath a smile visible for a moment before it was managed back into composure. "My wife," he said, "is either very brave or very foolish." "I have been told it is difficult to distinguish two from the outside," Eleanor said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he picked up his wineglass and said, "Tell me about the publishing house." She learned over the following days the geography of his life. not the geography of the house that she had from Thomas, who provided her a hand-drawn map on the second morning, with the positions of every piece of furniture marked in pencil, the Duke's most used routes indicated with small arrows, the rooms that were in regular use separated from the rooms that were not. She studied it the way she had once studied accounts, looking for patterns, for the logic underneath the arrangement, for what the system was actually designed to accomplish. The rooms that were not in use were the ones that had been Caroline's. She learned this from Thomas on the fourth day, when she asked about the cast wing, and he gave her the brief, careful answer of a man who had decided she deserved the truth, but intended to let her determine how much of it she needed. Caroline Whitmore, née Barlow, the Duke's wife of 6 years, dead 3 years before Eleanor arrived. Not from illness, from an accident on the road to London, in the early winter, in a carriage that had been in bad conditions for reasons that nobody had fully explained to Thomas's satisfaction. The Duke did not discuss her. The staff did not mention her. Her portrait was in the east corridor, and Eleanor passed it each morning on her way to the kitchen accounts, and she looked at it, sometimes a fair woman, younger than Eleanor had imagined, with an expression that managed to be both beautiful and slightly remote, as though even the painter had not quite been able to get close enough. She did not ask Adrian about her. She waited, not because she was afraid of the answer, but because she had learned, in 4 years of managing difficult situations for other people, that some information reveals itself in its own time, and pulling it forward before it was ready produced only incomplete versions of the truth. What she watched instead was how he moved. By the end of the first week, she had revised every assumption she had carried through the church door. He was not diminished. He was not dependent. He was not in any meaningful sense reduced. He was a man who had rebuilt his entire life around a different set of tools, and he had done it with a precision and intelligence that she found, the more she understood it, genuinely remarkable. He navigated the house without hesitation. He managed his correspondence dictated to a secretary who came on Tuesday and Thursday mornings with the same efficiency, from the sound of it, as he had before the accident. He knew the estate accounts by the figures Thomas reported to him verbally, retained them completely, and asked precise follow-up questions that told her he was tracking multiple financial threads simultaneously. He was not a man managing in spite of what had happened to him. He was a man who had rebuilt an entire operating system for himself, piece by piece, and was running it at full capacity. The only place it failed was with other people. She told him this on the 7th evening. They had established, without formally discussing it, the habit of dinner together. He had not invited her. He had simply, on the second evening, not been surprised when she appeared. By the third evening, Thomas had begun setting the table for two without being asked. "You manage everything in this house," she said, "except the people in it." He set down his glass. "I manage this house very effectively." "You manage the systems," she said, "the accounts and the schedules and the furniture positions. Those are not the same as the people." She looked at him across the table. "When did you last speak to Mrs. Harding?" A pause. "Who is Mrs. Harding, your housekeeper?" "She has been here for 8 months. She is extremely competent, and she is currently considering another position because she has not had a direct conversation with you since her first week." Eleanor kept her voice even. "She does not know whether you are satisfied with her work. She does not know your preferences for the management of the linen room because she was afraid to ask, and no one told her. She is making decisions about your household based on inference and hoping she is correct." He was very still. "She is going to leave," Eleanor said, "not because she is dissatisfied, but because working in a house where you cannot tell if you are doing well eventually becomes untenable. People need to know if they matter. She is compensated correctly. Her schedule is managed by Thomas. She needs to know that the Duke of Whitmore is aware she exists," Eleanor said simply. "That he knows her name, and that he is capable of telling her when she has done something right." The silence lasted long enough that she thought she had pushed too far, that this was the thing that would snap whatever fragile negotiation they had been conducting all week. She watched his jaw, waiting for the specific set that meant he had decided to be done with the conversation. Instead, he said, very quietly, "Is this also from your experience, managing complicated situations for other people?" "Yes," she said. "And do you know my name, Eleanor?" She looked at him. "Adrian," she said. which I would use if you invited me to. The jaw, the recalibration, Adrian, he said, as though testing whether she had said it correctly. Yes, another pause. Then tell me what she needs to hear. She blinked. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Harding. What she needs to hear. He turned toward her fully. Specifically, tell me what I should say, and I will decide if I am capable of saying it. Eleanor looked at him for a moment. He was not asking her to manage him. He was asking her to help him, which was entirely different, and she understood immediately that this was the first time in a very long time that he had asked anyone for that. Start with her name, Eleanor said. Use it once. Then tell her that Thomas has reported that the linen inventory is well managed and that you are satisfied with how the household is running. That is all. 2 seconds he was quiet. It costs you nothing, she said, and it is accurate. Both of those things are true. He picked up his wine glass. Set it down, looked or rather oriented toward the window. Tomorrow morning, he said. Mrs. Harding is usually in the east corridor between 9 and 1:30, Eleanor said. She manages the linen rooms before the midday domestic meeting. He turned toward her again, the full directed attention. You have been here 9 days, he said. I pay attention, she said. We have established this, and then not the architecture of a smile, not the structure beneath it held carefully in check. The actual thing, brief, unguarded, real. You are, he said, completely unlike anything I expected. I will take that, Eleanor said, as a compliment. It was intended as one, he said. The smile was already managed back to stillness. But it had been there, she had seen it. And she filed it, carefully, in the place she was building for things about this man, that she intended to understand properly, not quickly, not by assumption, but by the slow, patient, attentive work of actually looking. She thought about what she had noticed in that drawing room. The precise reach for the chair arm, the hand that found the document without feeling for it, the confidence of a man who knew exactly where everything was. She thought about what it might mean if the darkness he lived in was not quite as complete as everyone believed. She said nothing about it, not yet. She picked up her glass, and she listened to the fire, and she began, as she always did, to pay attention. She spoke to Mrs. Harding herself first, not to interfere, to observe. She found her in the east corridor at 9:15, exactly where she had told Adrian she would be, and she stopped and asked a single question about the linen inventory. Not because she needed the information, because she wanted to see what Mrs. Harding's face did when someone acknowledged her work directly. The woman's entire body changed, shoulders down, breath easier. The careful professional mask softened for a moment into something simply human gratitude, mixed with the particular surprise of someone who had stopped expecting to receive it. Eleanor filed this, then she went to find her husband. He was in the study already at his desk. She knocked twice, entered, and said without preamble, Mrs. Harding is in the east corridor. She will be there for another 10 minutes. Adrian set down his pen. You timed this. I told you she would be there between 9 and 1:30. I arrived at 9:15. You are being offered a window, not a command. A pause. He stood without the hesitation that a man genuinely uncertain of his surroundings would have shown. Crossed to the door, stopped. You are going to follow me, he said. It was not a question. I am going to walk in the same direction, she said. Whether that constitutes following depends on how you choose to interpret it. The corner of his mouth, he walked. She stayed 2 steps behind him, not hovering, not guiding, simply present, and she watched him navigate the corridor from memory, with the easy confidence that she was beginning to understand was the real version of him. Not diminished, not careful, certain. Mrs. Harding was at the far end of the corridor when she heard his footsteps and turned. Eleanor saw her face change immediately, the professional composure of a woman who had learned to make herself unremarkable in the presence of her employer snapping into place with eccentric practice. Adrian stopped approximately 4 feet from her, the right distance, not too close, not so far that the conversation required raised voices. Mrs. Harding, he said. She blinked, just once, the blink of someone hearing their name from a source where they had not expected it. Your Grace, she said. Thomas tells me the household accounts are well managed, he said. The linen inventory in particular. I am so satisfied with how things are running. The silence that followed was short, 6 seconds perhaps. But Eleanor, watching from 2 steps back, saw everything that happened in those 6 seconds on Mrs. Harding's face, the initial surprise, the processing. Then something that was not quite tears, but was in the same family, the specific emotional response of someone who has been working very hard in a silence that began to feel like judgment, and has just been told the silence was not judgment at all. "Thank you, Your Grace," Mrs. Harding said. Her voice was entirely professional. Her hands, which she had clasped in front of her, loosened. Adrian nodded once, turned, walked back down the corridor. Eleanor fell into step beside him, this time not behind. He said nothing until they were back in the study, and then he sat, and he said. Her voice changed. "Yes," Eleanor said. He paused, reaching for the word. "Surprised. She had not been sure you knew she existed," Eleanor said. "Now she does." He was quiet for a moment. "That is a very small thing to matter that much." "Most things that matter are small," she said. "The large ones are just the accumulation of small ones over a long time." He picked up his pen. "Set it down again." "Sit," he said, not a command, but also not quite an invitation. The middle register of a man who wanted company, and was not practiced at asking for it. She sat. By the end of the second week she had established, without formally announcing it, the system the house had actually needed for 4 years. It was not complicated. It required only what she already knew how to do: pay attention, identify where the gaps were, and fill them without making the filling into a performance. She met with Thomas every morning and took the notes he had been keeping in a ledger that was thorough, accurate, and completely unread by anyone with the authority to act on its contents. She reviewed the household accounts, which were sound but inefficient in 3 specific areas, and made corrections that saved money, without requiring any single person to be blamed for the previous approach. She learned which staff members needed direct instruction and which needed to be trusted and left alone. She learned that the cook, a woman named Bess who had been at Whitmore Hall for 11 years, had been feeding a household of 1, with menus designed for 12 out of some combination of habit and optimism, and that redirecting that energy toward a smaller, better executed rotation of dishes produced meals that were markedly superior to anything Eleanor had eaten in the first week. She told Bess this directly. Bess looked at her for a long moment and then said, "The last 3 women who came through here didn't eat enough to tell whether the food was good or not." "I eat properly," Eleanor said. "I can see that," Bess said, with the particular approval of a cook for someone who treated food as a serious matter. "You'll do." Eleanor had the distaste that Cec's endorsement was more significant than the Duke's. What she did not do in those 2 weeks was touch anything in the study. Not the correspondence, not the books, not the arrangement of the small stones that weighted the papers, or the position of the inkwell, or the angle of the lamp. She entered twice a day, morning and evening, and she sat across from him and they talked, and she did not alter a single thing in the room that was his primary territory. He noticed this. She could tell because he noticed everything. On the 14th day he said, "You have not moved anything in here." "No, the lamp angle is inefficient for a second person in the room." She looked at the lamp. He was correct. "I can read by the window light." "You have been reading by the window light for 2 weeks." "I have, that is," he said carefully, "unnecessary." "You may adjust the lamp." She looked at him. "Are you certain?" "I would not have said it if I were not certain." A pause. 11 degrees to the left. That is the range within which I can adjust for it, without losing the angle I need. 11 degrees. She moved the lamp 11 degrees. He did not test it, he simply continued writing, and the quality of his posture shifted marginally. Not discomfort resolved, something smaller and more significant. Trust placed carefully in a single small gesture. "Thank you," she said. "It is your house as well," he said without looking up. "I should have said that earlier." The ward arrived on a Thursday. Eleanor had known he was coming. Thomas had mentioned it briefly during the morning account review. The way he mentioned things he considered significant, without elaboration, watching her face to measure her response. James Whitmore's son, 8 years old. His parents dead 6 months ago in a fever that had moved through their household in less than 2 weeks. The boy had been with an aunt in Yorkshire since then, and the aunt had written politely, persistently, and with increasing directness that she felt the child would benefit from the stability of his uncle's household. Adrian had not discussed it with Eleanor. She had not asked. She understood by now That there were areas of his life he approached in sequence, that he processed difficult things internally first, completely, before he was willing to bring them into conversation, and that pressing him, before he had completed that process, produced nothing useful. She waited. He told her at dinner on the Wednesday evening, the night before the boy arrived. "My brother's son is coming tomorrow," he said. "I know," she said. Thomas mentioned it. A pause. What else did Thomas mention? Only the practical details. She kept her voice neutral. 8 years old, arriving by noon, he set down his fork. "His name is William. He was James spoke of him often. He was by all accounts a lively child before," he stopped. Before his parents died," she said simply, not softening it and not hardening it. "Yes." He picked up his fork again, then set it down again without eating. "I have not spent meaningful time with children. I am not." He paused. "I am not certain I know how to manage this." "You are not required to manage it," she said. "He is a child who has lost his parents, not a system that requires optimization." The jaw. The recalibration. She was learning to read it now, the specific quality of the stillness that meant she had said something that landed somewhere real. "What does he need?" Adrian said. "Consistency," she said. "Someone who is the same person every day. Someone who doesn't adjust their behavior for him, or become artificially cheerful in a way that children recognize immediately as dishonest." She looked at him across the table. "You are, whatever else you are, consistent and entirely honest." He was quiet. "He will not be easy," she said. "Children who are grieving are often angry, or silent, or they behave normally and then fall apart in unexpected moments. You cannot plan for it." She paused. "But you can be there." "I am not certain what that looks like," he said, "from my position." "I know," she said. "We will find out together." He looked at her, the directed, full attention look. Then he picked up his fork and he ate, and he said nothing else about it. And she understood that this was him accepting what she had said, as much as he was capable of accepting anything he hadn't fully processed yet. William arrived at 11:45 the next morning. Eleanor heard the carriage before she heard anything else, and she came to the entrance hall with Thomas and waited. Adrian was not there. She had expected this, had understood, without discussing it, that he would not stand in an entrance hall and wait, because waiting in public spaces was something he had systematically eliminated from his life. The boy who came through the door was small for 8. Not fragile. There was nothing fragile in the set of his jaw, which was his father's jaw. The jaw she had seen in a single portrait in the East Corridor, but contracted. The particular smallness of a child who has learned in the past 6 months that the world is not a safe size and has adjusted accordingly. He looked at Eleanor. She looked back. "You must be William," she said. Normal voice. Not elevated, not softened, the voice she used for everyone. "Yes," he said. "I am Eleanor. I live here." She did not say Duchess. She did not say your uncle's wife. She said "I live here," which was accurate and which established, without performance, that she was part of the household and not a visitor. He looked around the entrance hall, with the specific cataloging attention of a child trying to determine whether a new place is safe. "It is large," he said. "It is," she agreed. "It takes time to learn where everything is." He looked at her again. Something shifted in his face, not warmth yet, but curiosity. The first crack in the sealed expression. "How long did it take you?" 3 weeks before I stopped taking wrong turns," she said. "I still occasionally end up in the wrong corridor if I am thinking about something else." The ghost of something at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but its predecessor. "Come," she said. "I will show you your room." She brought William to Adrian's study that first afternoon. Not immediately. She gave the boy an hour to settle, to examine his room with the thoroughness she was beginning to recognize as a family characteristic. To eat something in the kitchen, where Bess fed him with the efficient warmth she extended to anyone who appeared in her domain at a mealtime. Then she took him to the study door and knocked twice. "Come," Adrian said. She opened the door and stayed in the doorway. William stood beside her. Adrian was at his desk. He did not look up immediately. She had explained to William on the walk down the corridor, in the same matter-of-fact tone she used for everything, that his uncle could not see, and that he navigated by sound and memory, and that the most helpful thing William could do in his presence was simply be where he said he was, and speak when he spoke. William had listened to this with absolute seriousness. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "You could ask him." He had looked at her, as though this was a surprising suggestion. "Then can I?" "He prefers direct questions to guessing," she said. "It is a family trait I am learning." Adrian set down his pen. "William," he said. "Yes, sir," William said. "You are standing in the doorway." "Yes, sir. There is a chair to the left of the door. Approximately 4 feet. If you sit in it, we can talk without you standing in the corridor." William found the chair and sat in it with the careful precision of someone taking up exactly the space that had been allocated, and no more. Eleanor stepped back from the doorway slightly. "Eleanor tells me you had a long journey," Adrian said. "It was all right," William said, a pause. Adrian turned slightly toward the boy's voice. "What was the road like? Muddy in the first part?" "Better after Gloucester, it usually is. The road through Gloucester is well maintained." Another pause. "Do you like to read?" "Then I used to." "The weight of that I used to sat in the room." Eleanor watched Adrian receive it. His hand stilled on the desk. "What did you read?" he said. "Natural history mostly. My father had a book about birds, a bee. I don't know where it is now." "Thomas," Adrian said, slightly louder, not looking away from where William's voice had come from. Thomas appeared from the corridor with the immediacy of a man who had been positioned nearby in case he was needed. "Your Grace, there is a natural history collection on the 3rd shelf of the library. The volumes with the green bindings. Have them moved to William's room." Thomas looked at Eleanor. Eleanor gave him the smallest nod. "Yes, Your Grace," Thomas said, and disappeared. William stared at the place where his uncle's face was pointed. "You don't have to do that, I know," Adrian said. "Those are your books. They are more useful to someone who will read them." He picked up his pen again. "The one about birds is the 4th from the left. The illustrations are detailed." William was quiet for a moment. "Do you read?" he asked. "Still, even though yes," Adrian said. "Thomas reads aloud on Tuesday evenings. We are currently working through a history of the Roman campaigns in Britain. It is considerably more violent than the title suggests." The ghost of a smile again, more definite this time. "My father said Romans were very good at organizing things." "Your father was correct," Adrian said, "though they were considerably better at conquering than at maintaining what they conquered. There is a lesson in that." "What lesson?" A pause. "That acquiring something and knowing what to do with it once you have it are different skills. Most people are better at one than the other." William considered this with the seriousness he appeared to bring to most things. "Which one are you better at?" Adrian was quiet for long enough that Eleanor held her breath. "Maintaining," he said finally. "I have never been particularly good at acquiring." Something in William's face changed, not the ghost of a smile this time. Something quieter and deeper recognition, the specific expression of a child hearing an adult say something true about themselves. "Me too," William said. The pattern that formed over the following week was not one Eleanor had designed. It simply emerged, the way patterns emerge when people stop trying to impose structure and allow the structure to be what the situation actually requires. William came to the study in the afternoons. Not always, sometimes he stayed in his room with the bird books, and sometimes he was in the kitchen with Bess, who had adopted him with the specific efficiency she brought to everything, but on most afternoons. He appeared in the study doorway and sat in the chair 4 feet to the left of the door and did whatever he did while Adrian worked. They did not always talk. This surprised Eleanor at first, and then it didn't. She understood by now that for Adrian, silence was not absence. It was a form of presence, the particular presence of someone who was fully aware of you, without requiring your constant engagement. For William, who was learning to exist in a house where everything was different from everything that had come before, this turned out to be exactly right. Eleanor watched this from the corridor when she could, and from across the dinner table in the evenings, and she thought about what her father had told her about the Duke. Solitary, he had difficult, impossible to help. What she was watching was not any of those things. What she was watching was a man who had organized his entire life around the specific grief of being unable to trust what he could not control, and a child in the same position for completely different reasons finding each other by accident in a study in Gloucestershire on a Thursday afternoon. She did not mention this to either of them. She simply kept the lamp at 11 degrees and let what was happening continue to happen. On the 8th evening, after William's arrival, she was in the study after dinner, their established hour, the two of them reading. The fire managed by whoever was closer to it when it needed attention when Adrian said, without looking up from the document Thomas had been reading to him earlier, he asked me today about Caroline. Eleanor set down her book. What did he ask? He found the portrait in the east corridor. A pause. He asked who she was. What did you tell him? The truth, he said. That she was my wife, that she died 3 years ago. How did he respond? He said. His jaw did the thing. He said he was sorry. And then he said, my mothers used to say that the people we lose don't really leave. They just go where we can't see them anymore. Another pause. He said his mother told him that after a pet died. He thought it might apply. Eleanor looked at her husband's face. She had learned, in 3 weeks, to read the surfaces of him, the jaw, the angle of his shoulders, the quality of the silences. What she was reading now was something she had not seen before. Not the recalibration, not the controlled management of his expression. Something that had come through the surface, briefly, without being managed. She was right, Eleanor said. His mother, yes. He picked up the document. Set it down. He stopped. He is very like James. In the way he says things. He said it carefully. The way people say things they have been turning over privately for a long time and are only now bringing into the air. James used to find the simple version of difficult things. He never made anything more complicated than it needed to be. A pause. I found that irritating when we were young. And now? Now I understand it was a skill, he said quietly. Not a simplicity. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, he is settling in. Yes. He picked up the document again. Eleanor. Yes, thank you. 2 words. Said very quietly with the particular weight of something that had been true for some time and was only now being said. She picked up her book. He came here needing somewhere to be, she said. So did I. You gave us both a place. He said nothing. But the quality of the silence changed, became something she had learned to recognize, in the past 3 weeks, as its own kind of answer. She found the inconsistency on a Sunday. She had not been looking for it. She had been walking past the study at an unusual hour later than she typically passed, because she had gone to the library and stayed longer than she intended with a volume on waterways that turned out to be more interesting than its title suggested, and the door was not fully closed. She was not in the habit of listening at doors. She stopped because she heard her name. Eleanor says the accounts in the East Wing are being managed incorrectly. William's voice. Eleanor is almost certainly right, Adrian said. She generally is. Does that bother you? No, it is useful. Papa used to say it was important to have people around you who were smarter than you about the things you weren't smart about. William paused. He said most men were too proud to do that. Your father, Adrian said, was correct more often than I told him. She should have moved on. She did not. Not because she was deliberately eavesdropping, but because something in the quality of what she was hearing kept her still. This was not the Adrian of the dinner table. This was something more unguarded. The voice of a man talking to a child in a room where he believed he was not being observed. Uncle Adrian, William said. Yes, can I ask you something? You may ask me anything. A beat. Then, do you actually see anything, or is it completely dark? The silence. Eleanor pressed her back against the wall and did not breathe. What makes you ask that? Adrian said. Because, William said, with the directness of a child who has not yet learned that some questions are not asked. You move like you can see things. Not all the way, but sometimes, like when Eleanor moved the lamp and you didn't ask where she put it. You just adjusted like you could tell. The silence was longer this time. Eleanor's heart was doing something significant. She was aware of it, the way you become aware of your heartbeat when something has shifted around you, and the air has a different quality. You are very observant, Adrian said finally. Is that an answer? William said. Another pause. It is a partial one, Adrian said. She heard William shift in his chair. That means yes, William said. That something is there, William. I won't tell anyone, he said immediately. I just want to know if it's true. The longest silence yet. Then Adrian said some. Shapes. Movement. Light and shadow. He stopped. It returned gradually over the past year. I did not tell anyone because you didn't know who to trust, William said. A pause. Yes, I understand that, William said simply. After Mama and Papa died, I didn't talk for 2 months. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't know who was safe. Eleanor stood very still in the corridor. and understood that she had just heard the conversation, that everything else had been building toward. Not because it had been planned, because a child had asked the right question at the right moment, and a man who had not trusted anyone in 4 years had answered. She moved away from the door quietly, back the way she had come. She needed to think. She needed to think carefully, and honestly, and without the interference of the feeling that was currently present in her chest, the specific complicated feeling of someone who has just learned that the thing they suspected was true, and that the truth is both better and more difficult than the suspicion. She went to her room. She sat at her writing desk. She did not write anything. She thought about the teacup, moved 6 inches to his left. She thought about 11 degrees. She thought about the lamp he had adjusted without asking where it was, because he had watched her move it and tracked the angle himself. She thought about a man who had rebuilt his entire life around navigating in darkness, who had built a system so thorough, so complete, so meticulously maintained that it functioned, and who had kept to that system even as the darkness had, slowly and partially, lifted. Not because he wanted to deceive anyone, because the system was all he had trusted when everything else had failed him, and returning the sight to the world meant returning to a world that had the capacity to take things from him again. She sat with this for a long time. Then she got up and went back to the corridor and knocked twice on the study door. "Come," Adrian said. She entered. William was in his chair reading one of the bird books. Adrian was at his desk. Neither of them showed any sign of the conversation she had partially heard. She crossed to the lamp. She moved it 2 degrees further than its current position. Adrian reached for his pen without hesitation, found it. Continued writing. She watched his hand. She sat down in her chair. Picked up her book. Said nothing. William glanced up from his bird book, looked at her and went back to reading. The fire moved in the grate. The evening continued around them, quiet and particular, and entirely its own. She did not say anything about what she had heard. Not that night. But she knew now, and he knew she knew, because he had heard her come back, and he had heard the lamp move, and he had not asked her what she was testing. The silence between them that evening was a different kind than any that had come before. It was the silence of 2 people standing on the same side of a door that had not yet been opened, both of them aware that the opening was coming. And both of them for entirely different reasons, afraid of what they would find when it did. She did not sleep well that night, not because she was distressed exactly. Because she was thinking, and she was the kind of person for whom thinking and sleeping occupied the same space, and could not happen simultaneously when the thinking was serious enough. She lay in the dark of her room and turned what she had heard over carefully, the way she had once turned complicated account ledgers, looking for the logic underneath, looking for the structure that explained why the numbers had landed where they had. He could see, partially, shapes and movement and light and shadow returning gradually over the past year. And he had told no one, not Thomas, who had managed his life for 4 years with complete and devoted efficiency. Not the physician who visited quarterly, not until a child had asked him directly with the specific, undeflectable honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose by asking anyone at all. She understood why. She understood it completely, which was the part that made it complicated. A man who had rebuilt everything around a fixed condition, who had turned the loss of his sight into a system so thorough it had become, his entire identity, would not find partial return of that sight a simple relief. He would find it a threat, because admitting the return meant dismantling the system. It meant stepping back into a world where he could be seen again, where his advantages were visible, where the careful isolation he had constructed around himself would no longer be justifiable. It meant being vulnerable to the world again in ways he had spent 4 years learning not to be. She understood this. She understood it because she had done a version of it herself, not with sight, but with need. She had spent years managing other people's households, other people's accounts, other people's problems, because being useful meant she could not be dismissed. Being necessary meant she could not be discarded. The usefulness was real. But it was also armor worn so long she had nearly forgotten it was armor. She got up at 6, made her own tea in the kitchen, which best permitted with the grudging tolerance she extended to people she had decided were not going to stop doing something regardless of whether it was technically her domain. She sat at the kitchen table and thought until the light changed, and then she went to find Thomas. Thomas was in the east corridor at 7:30, which was where he always was at 7:30, and she stopped him and said, "I need to ask you something directly." He turned and gave her the full, assessing attention she had come to regard as his most honest mode. "Yes, Your Grace. Has his sight returned at all? Any part of it?" Thomas was quiet for 3 seconds, she counted. 3 seconds for a man who processed information as quickly as Thomas Hale was a significant pause. "I am not the right person to answer that question," he said. "I know," she said. "I am not asking you to confirm or deny it. I am asking whether, in your observation of him over the past year, you have noticed anything that would be consistent with partial recovery." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "I have noticed," he said carefully, "that he locates objects he has not been told the position of with a frequency that exceeds what memory alone would explain." A pause. "I have also noticed that he did not walk into the chair. William moved in the 3rd week of his arrival. The chair had been moved 6 inches from its established position." Another pause. "He stepped around it without being told." She nodded once. "Thank you, Thomas, Your Grace. He has his reasons." "I know he does," she said. "I am not angry." Thomas looked at her with the expression of someone confirming something he had suspected. "No," he said. "I can see that." She went to the study. It was 8 o'clock. Adrian was already at his desk. She knocked twice, entered, and crossed directly to the chair across from him without preamble, and she sat, and she said, "I need to tell you something." He set down his pen. "You heard us last night. It was not a question." She had known it would not be. "I did not intend to. I was passing the door." "How enough," she said. The important part. He was very still. The controlled stillness she had learned to read by now as the surface over deep water, the visible part of a much larger thing underneath. "I am not going to pretend I did not hear it," she said. "And I am not going to wait for you to raise it, because I think you would wait indefinitely, and we would both spend that time navigating around it." She kept her voice even. "But I also am not here to demand an explanation. I want you to know what I actually think, which is that I understand why you did not tell anyone. I understand it specifically, not generally." He said nothing. "What I need to know," she said, "is whether you intend to continue as you have been." "Continue," he said, "allowing everyone in this house, including me, to manage your life around a condition that has partially changed." She held his gaze, or rather, held the direction of his attention, which was all she could hold. "Because if you do, that is your choice and I will respect it. But I need to know so that I am not making decisions based on information that is not accurate." The jaw, longer than usual this time, she waited. "I did not intend," he said finally, "to deceive you. I know that. It began before you arrived." The physician noticed some response to light approximately 18 months ago. Shapes first, then movement. He stopped. "I could not. There was no clear point at which it made sense to announce it. The first weeks I was not certain if it was permanent. And then it became the longer I waited, the more it seemed like a deception, and so I waited longer." He turned toward her. "That is not a good explanation. It is an honest one," she said. "That is more useful." A pause. "You are not angry." I said I wasn't. Most people would be. "I am not most people," she said. "As I think we have established." The corner of his mouth. "Very slight. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing immediately," she said. "But I would like us to stop pretending around it, between the two of us. You don't have to tell Thomas or the physician or anyone else on any schedule. But in this room, I would like us to be honest about what you can and cannot see, because I cannot help you effectively if I am working from wrong information." He was quiet for a long moment. "What can you see?" she said. "Right now in this room." A pause. "Then your outline. The lamp, the chair you are sitting in." He stopped. "Your hands when they move. Can you see my face?" "Not clearly." "Shapes?" "The general no, not your face." She nodded. "All right." She picked up her book from where she had left it the previous evening. "I am going to read. You are going to work. And tonight at dinner, you are going to tell me, directly, what has been happening with your sight over the past year. All of it, in sequence." She opened the book. "We will start there." He looked at her. The directed attention that she now understood was made up of more than one sense for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes. I can see that you moved the lamp by more than 11 degrees this morning." She looked up from her book. 14, he said. "Perhaps 15. She looked at the lamp. She looked back at him. And And the additional angle is actually better, he said. For both positions in the room, she held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to her book. I know, she said. I have known for 2 weeks. The silence that followed was warm. She felt it, the specific warmth of something that has been under pressure for a long time and has just been allowed to release. Neither of them said anything else, but the room was different from what it had been the morning before, and they both knew it. He told her that evening. Not all of it immediately, he approached it the way he approached difficult correspondence, beginning with the most factual layer and working inward. The physician's assessment 18 months ago, the gradual recovery of peripheral light sensitivity, the shapes that had resolved slowly over months into more defined outlines. The specific limitation, he could see edges, movement, the general architecture of a room, the difference between light and shadow. He could not read, could not identify faces at any distance, could not see fine detail or color clearly. What he could do, she realized as he spoke, was navigate a room he knew, track movement in his peripheral field, locate objects within a familiar space with an accuracy that would, to someone who did not know him well, appear simply as the extraordinary product of memory and habit. The physician wants to consult a specialist in London, he said. He has been wanting to for 6 months. I have refused. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because the specialist will either confirm a ceiling on recovery, which I have already accepted, or suggest a possibility of further improvement. And I do not know which of those I am more afraid of. She looked at him across the dinner table. You are afraid of the improvement. I am afraid, he said carefully, of hoping. I spent the first year after the accident hoping. The hope was it was exhausting. It required him constant maintenance and produced nothing reliable. He set down his fork. What I built instead was reliable, the system, this house. This life. A pause. You understand that? I understand it completely, she said. And I understand that I am part of that system now, whether either of us planned it. And that the system works. She paused, but Adrian. A system is not a life. He did not answer immediately. William moved a chair 3 weeks ago, she said. You stepped around it. He saw you. I know. He is 8 years old, and he noticed because he was paying attention. People who pay close attention to you will continue to notice. She kept her voice level. And when they do, they will not understand why you said nothing. They will understand only that you chose not to tell them. And that is a different thing. He looked at her, the full directed look. You are saying I have to tell Thomas, he said. I am saying you have to decide what you want your life to look like from here, she said. And then build it. Instead of maintaining something that was designed for a version of yourself that no longer entirely exists. The silence was the long kind, the kind she had learned to sit with rather than fill. Then he said, what if I told the physician and agreed to the consultation in London? He said it as though testing the words. What would that require of me? Getting in a carriage, she said. Staying at the townhouse for 2 nights. Speaking to a specialist who will ask you detailed questions about what you can and cannot see. And you, he said, would you come? She looked at him. He had said it as a statement, a question inside it, the particular construction of someone who wanted something, and had not quite learned yet to ask for it directly. Yes, she said, if you want me to. I want you to, he said. She nodded. Then I will write to Thomas in the morning. We can go next week. He picked up his wineglass. Set it down, picked it up again. Eleanor. Yes. Why are you? He stopped. Started differently. You did not agree to this. To any of this. You agreed to manage a household and exist in a marriage of arrangement. You have spent 5 weeks diagnosing my problems and correcting my staff and convincing me to do things I should have done years ago. The jaw. Why? She considered the question seriously, because he deserved a serious answer. Because you asked for tea and immediately reached to the wrong side of the desk, she said. And when I moved it, you found it immediately, and you went completely still, as though something had surprised you. She paused. And I thought this man has not been surprised in a very long time. And that seemed to me like a very sad thing. Said nothing for a moment. That is not a strategic reason, he said. No, she agreed. It is not. She went to find William before bed. He was in his room, with the bird book open on the desk, not reading, looking at an illustration with the particular distant focus of a child who was thinking about something other than what was in front of him. He looked up when she knocked. Can I come in? She asked. Yes, he said. She sat on the edge of the chair near his desk, the same way she sat with Adrian, the same calibrated distance that was close enough to be present and far enough to be unthreatening. I want to thank you, she said. He looked at her. For what? For asking your uncle the question you asked him last night. His expression shifted the careful expression of a child determining whether he was in trouble. I wasn't trying to. You asked him something no one else was willing to ask, she said. And he answered, that matters more than you know. William was quiet for a moment. He seemed relieved, he said finally. After, he seemed like he'd been carrying something and got to put it down for a minute. She looked at this 8-year-old child, who had lost both his parents 6 months ago, and arrived in a strange house, and spent 3 weeks quietly cataloging his uncle with the precision of a naturalist, studying a new species. And she thought about what James Whitmore must have been like, as a father, to produce someone with this quality of attention. He was, she said. You were right about that. William looked at the bird book. My mother used to say that the people who are hardest to reach are usually the ones who most need reaching. He paused. She said it about Papa sometimes, when he was difficult. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. She was very practical, he said. She said wisdom was just practicality that had been around long enough. He looked up at Eleanor. You are practical, I try to be. Uncle Adrian is practical too. But he is practical about the wrong things sometimes. He said it with the complete confidence of a child stating an observable fact. He is very good at managing things. He is not very good at knowing which things need managing. She looked at him for a moment. No, she said, he is getting better at it. William considered this. Because of you? Because of you too, she said. Don't underestimate what you have done here in 3 weeks. He looked uncertain, the way children look when adults say something that contradicts what they have concluded about themselves. I haven't done anything. You asked him about the birds. You told him your mother's saying about the people we lose. You moved a chair and didn't pretend you hadn't noticed when he walked around it. She held his gaze. Every one of those things mattered. He was quiet. William, she said, this is your home, not temporarily. It is where you live. I want you to know that. She paused. Whatever else changes here, and things will change, because that is what happens in houses where people are actually living in them. That part does not change. He looked at her for a long moment with the dark, direct eyes that were so precisely his uncle's in shape. Are you and Uncle Adrian? He stopped, started again. Are you actually married? Like really? She held back the slight surprise this question caused. We are legally married, yes. That's not what I mean, he said, with the specificity of a child who has a precise question and wants a precise answer. I mean like Mama and Papa were married, where you choose the other person. She was quiet for a moment. We are working on that part, she said honestly. He thought about this. Mama said that was the harder part anyway. The legal part was just a morning. The choosing part was every day after. She looked at this child. Yes, she said, that is exactly right. The letter arrived the next morning. It was addressed to the Duke, and Thomas brought it to the study during the morning account review that Eleanor had taken to attending, and the quality of Thomas's face when he placed it on the desk told her it was not ordinary correspondence. Adrian held it, turned it over. Read it, he said to Thomas, his standard instruction for correspondence he had not received in advance. Thomas read it. His voice, when he reached the second paragraph, changed by a degree that was small but audible. The letter was from a solicitor representing the estate of Lady Caroline Whitmore's family. It stated that new information had come to light regarding the circumstances of Lady Caroline's death, specifically, regarding the carriage journey that had ended her life. The family requested, in the careful language of people who have engaged a solicitor to be careful on their behalf, a formal meeting with the Duke of Whitmore to discuss this information before they determined what action to take. The letter was dated 3 days ago. The meeting was requested within the fortnight. Adrian said nothing for a long time after Thomas finished reading. Eleanor did not speak either. She waited, because the silence was not the kind that wanted to be filled. It was the kind that was processing something significant. Leave it, Adrian said finally. Thomas set the letter on the desk. Left Eleanor looked at her husband. He had not moved. His hands were flat on the desk, palms down, which was not his usual posture, and told her the news had landed in the place where things land when they are not entirely unexpected. You knew something about the accident, she said. It was not a guess, a long pause. Not what they know, he said. Or claimed to know. He turned toward her. Caroline did not die by accident. The room was completely quiet. She was leaving, he said. Not visiting London. Leaving, the carriage was packed with things she had not told me she intended to take. He said it with the flatness of someone who has removed all the feeling from a thing in order to be able to say it at all. I found out 3 days after the funeral, from her maid, who came to return a brooch she believed should go to Caroline's family. His jaw tightened once, slightly, then released. She had discovered the week before that I could see. Some of it, shadows, movement. She had seen me track her across the room without being told she had moved. Eleanor went very still. She had married a blind man, he said. She was managing an estate that operated around a blind man. Her entire social position, the sympathy, the particular kind of respect that attached to a woman who had stayed was built on that. His voice remained level. She intended to go to her family's house, establish that she had discovered the deception, and pursue a legal separation on those grounds. She thought you had deceived her deliberately, Eleanor said. Yes, he turned away. She was not wrong that I had concealed it. She was wrong about the intention, but I never had the opportunity to explain the difference. The accident happened on the way. Yes, silence. Her family, Eleanor said. What do they know? I don't know what they know now. At the time they knew she had left quickly. They did not know why. A pause. The maid was the only person who understood the full picture. She left my employ shortly after. He stopped. I paid her generously. I told myself that was the ethical choice. I knew at the time that it was also the convenient one. Eleanor looked at him directly. You let the story stay as it was. The story stayed as it was because I did not correct it, he said. Which is not quite the same thing. But it is close enough that I will not pretend otherwise. What does her family have? That is what I do not know. He picked up the letter. Set it down. It could be the maid. It could be correspondence. Caroline wrote letters frequently. It could be nothing, and this could be a family that has spent 3 years wondering if there was more to the story, and only hired someone find out. He paused. It could also be something I have not anticipated. She thought for a moment. You need to see them, I know. And you cannot go to that meeting as a blind man, she said. Not now, not with this. He was quiet. If they have evidence that Caroline was leaving you, that she had discovered a discrepancy between your condition, as presented, and your actual condition, and you arrive at that meeting still performing blindness. You hand them everything they need. She kept her voice level, because level was what the moment required. Whatever they have, you are better positioned to respond to it honestly than to add another layer of concealment. Honesty, he said, is going to be a complicated conversation. It is going to be a more complicated conversation if you try to manage it dishonestly, she said. Trust me, I have managed complicated accounts. The ones that have been falsified are always harder to correct. He turned toward her, the full attention. You are comparing my marriage to a falsified ledger. I am comparing concealment to bad accounting, she said. The principle holds regardless of the subject matter. A pause. Then the jaw did the thing, but this time it resolved not into control, but into something that was, she realized after a moment, the specific expression of someone deciding to trust the ground they are standing on. Come with me, he said to the meeting. Yes, she said. Obviously, I am going to have to tell Thomas. Yes. And the physician. Yes. And write to the specialist in London and request the appointment be brought forward. Probably why, she said. He was quiet for a moment. This is going to be significantly more difficult than the past 5 weeks. Yes, she said, it is. She picked up the letter from the desk and read it herself, the careful, formal language, the measured request, the name of the solicitor at the bottom. She set it down, but you are not managing it alone this time. That is the part that is different. He looked at her, the directed attention, the full presence of a man who was adding something to his understanding of another person in real time. Eleanor, he said, yes, I did not expect you. She held his gaze. No, she said, I don't imagine you did. I mean, he stopped, started again, in the careful way he started things when he wanted to be accurate. I arranged this marriage because I needed a wife to manage the practical situation, and because my solicitor told me Miss Ashford was capable and sensible and unlikely to create difficulties. He paused. I did not anticipate that you would be this, she said. Someone who moves lamps 14 degrees and talks to housekeepers and teaches an 8-year-old that his uncle is worth paying attention to. He stopped. Someone who hears the worst of what I have not told anyone and responds by asking what I can see right now in this room. The fire moved. The light moved with it. She was aware of him tracking it, the small automatic adjustment of someone who had learned to use every available piece of information. She thought about what William had said. The choosing part was every day after. I am going to go right to Thomas, she said, and to the physician. And then I am going to find William and tell him we are taking a trip to London, which he will consider excellent news. She stood. And tonight, you are going to tell me what you actually want your life to look like. Not what the situation requires, what you want. He looked at her, and this time she thought for the first time that she could see the looking. The slight adjustment of his focus, the way his head angled by a degree when she stood, tracking her movement. I will think about it, he said. Good, she said. You have until dinner. She walked to the door. His voice stopped her. Eleanor. She turned. Thank you, he said, for not deciding what I should want before you asked. She looked at him for a moment, this man who had built a world around the fixed certainty of his loss, and who was standing now at the edge of something that had no fixed certainty at all, and who was, despite everything, still standing. Ask me in a few months, she said, whether I have managed to stop deciding things before asking. I have the tendency, I know, he said. I have noticed. She went into the corridor and closed the door behind her, and she stood in the quiet hall for a moment, with her hand still on the door handle. And she thought about ledgers and lamps and the 11 degrees between a man's life and the life he had not let himself want. The distance, she was beginning to understand, was not as far as it had seemed from the outside. Thomas did not say anything for a long moment after Adrian told him. He stood in the center of the study, not the doorway, not the edge of the room, but fully inside it, the way Thomas stood when something required his complete attention, and he was quiet. Adrian sat at his desk and let the silence be what it needed to be, which was what he always did when he had said a difficult thing and was waiting to see what came back. How long? Thomas said finally. The physician noticed the first signs 18 months ago, Adrian said. Peripheral light sensitivity. It progressed from there. 18 months. Thomas said it without inflection, which was its own form of inflection. You have been managing the estate for 18 months with partial sight, and you did not tell me. I managed it the same way I had been managing it for 4 years. The system did not change. I am not talking about the system. Thomas looked at him directly. I am talking about the fact that I have spent 4 years adjusting every variable in this house to account for your condition. Every staff arrangement, every account review, every visiting solicitor who was placed on your left side so you could find his hand for a handshake. And for 18 months the condition I was adjusting for was no longer the condition you had. Adrian said nothing. I would like to know, Thomas said, very carefully, whether I am angry because I am surprised. Or whether I am surprised because I am angry. Those are not mutually exclusive, Eleanor said from her chair. Thomas looked at her. She had been present at Adrian's request. He had asked her, that morning, simply by saying her name when he told her Thomas was coming, which she had understood as the particular request of someone who wanted a witness who was already on his side. No, Thomas agreed, they are not. He looked back at Adrian. Why? That is the question I need an answer to. Because the first weeks I was not certain it was permanent, Adrian said. And then I was not certain what it meant. And then, he stopped. And then it had been too long, and I did not know how to explain it, without the explanation itself becoming the problem. The explanation is not problem, Thomas said. The waiting is the problem. I know that now. You knew it then. Thomas said it without sharpness, which made it land harder than sharpness would have. You are not a man who fails to understand the consequences of his choices. You understood and you chose anyway. Yes, Adrian said. I did. The silence was different now, not processing, but the specific silence of someone deciding whether the truth they have received is something they can accept and continue from, or something that requires a different response. Thomas looked at the desk, at the arrangement of objects, the positioned papers, the small stones that weighted the correspondence. He had placed those stones himself 18 months ago, because the wind from the window moved the papers, and Adrian could not always catch them when they moved. He reached out and picked up one of the stones, set it down, looked at Adrian. "Tell me what you can see," he said. "Right now your outline, the lamp, the general dimensions of the room." Adrian paused. "Your face at this distance is not clear. I can see you looking at me." Thomas nodded slowly. "Can you see the letter on the far left corner of the desk?" "I can see there is something there. I cannot read it." "Can you see me walk to the door?" "Yes." Thomas walked to the door and back. Sat down in the chair across the desk, the chair Eleanor had established as hers, which he took without ceremony, because she waved him toward it. "The chair in the east corridor," he said. William moved it. 3 weeks ago. "I know," Adrian said. "You stepped around it." "Yes." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I thought I had been careless," he said. "I thought I had miscounted the position, and that you said simply that your memory had compensated." He paused. "I spent a day reviewing my notes on the corridor arrangement." "I am sorry," Adrian said. "That is the part I am most sorry for. Not the concealment from the wider world, but this, making you doubt your own work." Thomas looked at him steadily. "I do not require your apology to forgive you," he said. "I require your honesty going forward. You have it. Completely. Not the version of it you have been offering." "Completely," Adrian said. Thomas stood. He had the quality, in this moment, of someone who has received a significant blow, absorbed it fully, and decided to remain standing. "The specialist in London," he said. "You want the appointment moved forward. Eleanor is writing to the physician this morning." "I will write," Thomas said. "I know Dr. Merton's schedule. I can get it arranged faster." He moved toward the door, then stopped. Turned back. "Your Grace." "Yes, I am glad you told me." He said it simply, without performance. "Whatever else, I am glad." He left. Adrian sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. Then he said, without turning toward Eleanor, "He is going to reorganize everything." "Yes," she said. "He is going to need to know what adjustments are still necessary and which ones can be changed. That is going to require detailed conversations, I know. And you are going to have them, I know that too." He picked up his pen. "Set it down, the letter from Caroline's family. I need to respond before we go to London." "We should have the solicitor review your response before it goes," she said. "We don't know what they have. We don't know the specific allegation. Until we do, every word you commit to paper matters." "You are thinking like an accountant again," he said. "I am thinking like someone who has seen people respond to legal letters before they understand the letter's purpose," she said. "The response shapes the conversation that follows. We need to control the shape." He looked toward her. "What do you suggest?" "Acknowledge receipt. Request a meeting. Do not confirm, deny, or explain anything until we are in the room with them and can see what they actually have." She paused. "And take your own solicitor." "Graves," he said. "He has handled the estate for 20 years. "Good. I would like to meet him before the meeting. Briefly. To understand what he knows about the circumstances of Caroline's death." A pause. "He knows what everyone knows, which is what you permitted everyone to know," she said. "He needs to know the fuller version before he walks into that room." Adrian was quiet for a moment. That is a significant amount of honesty to distribute in a short time. "Yes," she said. She did not soften this. "But it is the correct amount. You are not going into that meeting carrying the weight of every story you have told. You are going in with the truth, with a solicitor who has the truth, and with a wife who has seen what happens when the accounts don't reconcile and knows how to stay steady when the numbers are bad." He turned fully toward her. "You are remarkably calm about this." "I am not calm," she said. "I am focused. Those are different things." The corner of his mouth moved. "What is the difference?" "Calm means the situation does not affect you. Focused means the situation affects you and you work anyway." She stood and picked up the letter. "I am going to draft the response to Graves. You are going to dictate the acknowledgement to Caroline's family solicitor. We will compare versions at midday." She was halfway to the door when he said her name. "Eleanor." She turned. He was looking at the space where she stood, the full, directed attention, and she could see now, knowing what she knew, the fractional adjustment of his focus when she moved. "Last night, you said I should tell you what I actually want my life to look like." I did not answer. "No, I gave you until dinner." "I am answering now." He turned back to the desk. "I want it to look like this. This conversation, the one we are having right now, about difficult things, where neither of us pretends the difficult things are not difficult. He picked up his pen. I want William to be here. I want Thomas to stop adjusting for a condition I no longer fully have. I want to go to London and see the specialist and know what I am actually working with, instead of the version I have been living inside. He stopped. I want, he said, more quietly, to stop being afraid of what I might see if I looked directly at something. She stood in the doorway and looked at this man who had built 4 years of careful, functional, completely isolated life around a loss that had partially healed, and who had kept the healing secret because the healing was more frightening than the loss, and she thought about what William had said. The choosing part was every day after. Then we start today, she said. With the letters. Yes, he said, with the letters. William took the news about London, with a seriousness she had come to expect from him, followed by a single question she had not. Will we go to the park? She looked at him across the kitchen table where she had found him eating an apple with the methodical attention he brought to everything. Which park? There is a park in London where you can see birds, he said. My father took me once. There were herons. There are several parks, she said. We will have time. He considered this. Will Uncle Adrian come to the park? If he chooses to. She looked at the boy. You could ask him. He might say no. He might, she agreed. But he has been saying no to things for 4 years, and he is currently trying to do that less. She paused. He responds well to direct questions from people who don't expect him to perform an answer. William thought about this. Like me, very much like you, she said. He ate the rest of his apple. All right, he said. I will ask him about the herons. He did that afternoon, standing in the study doorway in the position he had claimed as his. He said, Uncle Adrian, in London, could we go and see the herons in the park? Adrian did not look up from the letter he was dictating. Which park? I don't know the name. My father took me. There were herons. St. James's, Adrian said. The herons are on the lake. He finished the sentence he was dictating and handed the draft to Thomas. Then he turned toward William's voice. Yes, we will go. William came into the room, sat in his chair, and opened his bird book. Thomas caught Eleanor's eye across the room. She gave him the smallest nod. He gave her the specific look she had come to understand as his version of acknowledgement, the look he gave when something had happened that he considered significant and did not intend to say so out loud. She went back to her draft. They left for London on a Wednesday morning. The carriage was arranged by Thomas with his usual precision departure time, route, the townhouse prepared, the appointments coordinated. Graves, the solicitor, was to meet them Thursday morning at 10. The specialist, Dr. Fenwick, was arranged for Thursday afternoon. Caroline's family's solicitor had replied with formal efficiency to their acknowledgement. The meeting was confirmed for Friday, 3 days, 3 conversations. Eleanor had organized them in sequence, in the way she organized everything by what each one required of the people in the room, and in what order those requirements could be best prepared for. Adrian sat across from her in the carriage, and William sat beside Eleanor. And the first hour passed in the comfortable quiet of people who had established their rhythm with each other, and did not need to fill the silence to confirm they were present. Then William said, "Can you see out the window?" He was asking Adrian. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Some, he said, movement. Light changing when we pass through shade. There are cows in the field, William said. On your side. I can see they are there, Adrian said. Not the detail. They are Herefords, William said, with the authority of someone who had recently read a detailed chapter on cattle breeds in the natural history volume that had replaced the bird book for 2 days. You can tell by the color pattern, red with a white face. I will take your word for it, Adrian said. My father said a man who doesn't know his cattle is a man who doesn't know his land, William said. He said it about himself. He didn't know his cattle at all. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Your father had many fine qualities, he said. Agricultural expertise was not foremost among them. The ghost of a smile on William's face more definite now than it had been in the first weeks, closer to the surface. He once tried to mend a fence himself, William said. The fence fell down twice after. The third time he paid the farmer and told him never to speak of it. He told me this story, Adrian said, as though it were someone else's fence. William looked at him. You knew? He told me it was a fence belonging to an acquaintance in the next county who had the misfortune of not knowing his tools, Adrian said. The description of the acquaintance was remarkably detailed for someone he claimed not to know well. William laughed. It was the first time Eleanor had heard it, a real laugh, unguarded, entirely his own. It lasted only a moment before it subsided into the more familiar quiet, but it had been there. She felt it in the carriage, the way you feel a change in the weather, a specific shift in the air that means something different is coming. Adrian heard it too. She could tell, from the quality of stillness, the stillness of a man receiving something he did not know he had been waiting for. Neither of them mentioned it. Graves was a compact man of 65, who had handled the Whitmore estate since Adrian's father's time, and who received the information about Adrian's partial sight recovery with the steady, organized composure of a man who had received surprising information across a desk for 40 years, and had learned to process it without betraying the processing. How partial, he said, shapes movement, not faces at this distance. Not text. Graves looked at Adrian, then at Eleanor. This affects the meeting Friday. Yes, Eleanor said. I would like to walk through what we know about Caroline's departure before we discuss Friday. I need to understand the legal position fully. Graves looked at her with the assessing expression of a professional encountering a capable person who has entered his domain. He decided something. What do you already know? Everything my husband has told me, she said, which I believe is complete. I would like to compare it with your understanding of the events at the time. Graves turned to Adrian. You have discussed this with her. Yes, Adrian said, the full version, yes. Graves folded his hands on the desk. The family's solicitor is a man named Pelham. He is thorough and he does not send letters of this nature without something to stand on. He paused. My concern is the maid. You paid her generously when she left your employ. I know, Adrian said. Generous severance to a domestic employee at a particular moment looks, from the outside, like a reason to have bought her silence. If Pelham has found her, and if she has spoken to him, she will have told him what she knew, Adrian said, which was that Caroline had discovered my sight was partially returning, and that she intended to leave on that basis, and that you knew she was leaving, Graves said. And that I knew she was leaving, Adrian confirmed. The room was quiet for a moment. The accident, Eleanor said. Was an accident, Adrian said. I did not know the road she took. I did not know the conditions. She told no one her route because she did not want to be followed. He said it flatly. I have lived with the knowledge that she died trying to leave me for 3 years. I do not require the suggestion that I had any involvement in the manner of her death. No one is making that suggestion, Eleanor said quietly. I want to make sure Graves understands you were not aware of the specific route or timing, so he can frame the response accordingly. Graves looked at her, then at Adrian. Your wife, he said, with the particular tone of a man revising his understanding of a situation, is an asset in this room. I know that, Adrian said. I did not know it until this morning, Graves said honestly. I apologize for not asking more questions when the marriage was arranged. She does not require your apology, Adrian said. She requires the meeting to be prepared correctly. Eleanor set her hands flat on the desk. Here is what I believe they have. The maid's account, which establishes that Caroline discovered the discrepancy and intended to act on it. Possibly some of Caroline's correspondence. She wrote letters frequently, and if any were sent before she left, they may have been preserved. And the question of the generous severance which Pelham will use to imply consciousness of wrongdoing. She paused. Here is what they do not have. Evidence that the partial sight recovery was a deliberate deception intended to harm Caroline. Evidence that anyone other than the weather and the road conditions caused the accident. And a client whose primary motivation is justice rather than... She stopped. Rather than what? Graves said. What does Caroline's family want? She asked him directly. Not legally. What do they actually want? Graves was quiet for a moment. Her brother, he said carefully, has never been satisfied with the circumstances. He is the one who engaged Pelham. A pause. He is also the one who made 3 separate inquiries about the eastern portion of the Whitmore estate in the 2 years after Caroline's death. Inquiries that were declined. The silence that followed had a specific quality. The land, Eleanor said. A motivation that Pelham will not put in the letter, Graves said, but one that shapes what resolution they are actually seeking. Eleanor looked at Adrian. He was facing slightly away from her, and she could see the angle of his jaw, the controlled stillness. Adrian, I heard, he said. Does the eastern parcel have value beyond the acreage? It borders the river, he said. It controls water access to the northern farms. It has been in the family for 200 years, a pause. Without it, the estate's income from the northern tenancies decreases significantly. With it, whoever holds it controls those tenancies. And Caroline's brother has wanted it since she died, Eleanor said. Since before she died, Graves said quietly. He approached James Whitmore, your late brother, about purchasing it 8 years ago. James declined. Adrian turned fully toward the desk. I was not aware of that. It was before the accident, Graves said. I handled the correspondence. James asked me not to raise it with you because he felt it was a minor matter. He paused. It became less minor. Eleanor looked at Graves steadily. Then Friday's meeting is not about Caroline, she said. Or not primarily. No, Graves said. It is about what they can extract in exchange for not making Caroline's departure and its circumstances a matter of public record. The word hung in the room. They are threatening to expose it, Adrian said. They are offering you the opportunity to resolve the situation privately, Graves said, in the careful language of someone distinguishing between a threat and a threat's polite formulation. Before the information becomes difficult to contain. Adrian was very still. Then he said, and if we don't resolve it privately? Then Pelham files a formal complaint with the magistrate regarding the circumstances of Lady Caroline's death. Not a criminal allegation, they don't have the evidence for that. But a civil inquiry into whether the marriage was conducted under false pretenses. Whether the concealment of your site recovery constitutes grounds for the estate to have been managed improperly during the period of claimed disability. Graves paused. It is a weak legal case, but a damaging public one. They want the land, Eleanor said, or they want the humiliation. They want leverage, Graves said, which is usually what people want when they don't have a case strong enough to win outright. Eleanor looked at Adrian. He had not moved. His hands were flat on his knees, which was the posture he used when he was thinking through something completely before deciding how to respond to it. Adrian, she said, yes, I need to know something before we decide how to approach Friday. Ask, is there any part of you that believes you deserve what they are threatening? The silence. Thomas, who had come with them, and was standing near the door in the particular position he occupied when he was present, without being part of the conversation, shifted slightly. Adrian said, yes. Which part? The part where she found out on her own because I did not tell her, he said. If I had told her when the sight began to return, if I had had the conversation I was afraid to have, she would not have felt deceived. She would not have left the way she left. The accident would not have happened on that road, on that night. He said it quietly and entirely without self-pity, which made it worse to hear than self-pity would have been. That part is mine. It does not belong to her brother. But it is real. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said, that part is yours, and you will carry it. But it is not the part that goes into the room on Friday. She leaned forward slightly. What goes into the room on Friday is the truth, not as a defense. As the actual account of what happened. Because the moment you allow them to define the truth, the moment you accept their version, in exchange for the land, or the silence, or anything else, you hand them everything. Every time. For as long as they choose to use it. Graves looked at her. She is right, he said, to Adrian, with the particular tone of a solicitor who has just had his own best advice stated more clearly than he had managed. And I want to note, for the record, that I would have said the same thing if given slightly more time. Adrian turned toward Eleanor, the full attention, something in it she had not seen before, not the recalibration, not the processing. Something older and quieter. The look of a man who has been carrying a weight for a long time and is not being told to put it down, but is being told, for the first time, that he does not have to carry it in the wrong direction. All right, he said, the truth, in the room, on Friday. All of it, Eleanor said. We will tell it correctly. But we will tell it once. Good, she said, and picked up her pen. Dr. Fenwick was a small man with precise hands and an office full of instruments she did not recognize. He examined Adrian for 40 minutes while Eleanor and William waited in the anteroom, William with his bird book. Eleanor with the letter from Pelham that she had read 4 times and was beginning to understand with the particular clarity that came from reading a difficult document slowly enough to see what it was actually saying rather than what it appeared to say. When Adrian came out, Fenwick stood beside him. The recovery is genuine, Fenwick said. He said it to Eleanor, because he had understood within 5 minutes of her arrival that she was the person who would ask the right questions. The peripheral recovery is largely stable at its current level. There is a possibility, not a certainty, of further central recovery over the next 12 to 18 months. I cannot promise it. I can say that the conditions for it are present. What does further recovery mean in practice? Eleanor asked. Faces at close distance, possibly text with assistance magnification, good light. Possibly the ability to read independently at some point. He paused. Not what he had before the accident. I want to be honest about that. But meaningfully more than he has now. Eleanor looked at Adrian. He was very still, not the controlled stillness. Something different, the stillness of someone standing on ground that has just shifted and is checking carefully whether it will hold. What does the treatment involve? She asked Fenwick. Rest, reduced strain on the affected area, a specific exercise regime for the eye muscles. Monthly reviews. He paused in time. The recovery happens at its own speed. We can create favorable conditions. We cannot force the timeline. She nodded. Thank you. Fenwick looked at Adrian. Do you have questions? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Is there a risk that the current recovery reverses? There is always that risk with this type of injury, Fenwick said honestly. However, the fact that the recovery has maintained its current level for 18 months without reversal is encouraging. I see no immediate indicators of deterioration. He paused. I would say the risk of losing what you have now is lower than the risk of not finding out what else might be possible. Adrian turned toward Eleanor, not to consult her. Simply to orient. The habitual gesture she now understood was partly sight and partly something else. The particular human instinct to turn toward the person you trust when you are receiving something significant. All right, he said. What do I need to do first? Fenwick handed him a card, held it at the precise angle and distance that allowed Adrian to take it without reaching. She noticed this and filed it as the gesture of a man who had done this before, who had learned. Come back in 3 weeks, he said. We begin then. They came out onto the street. William was immediately at Adrian's side, not to guide, she noticed, but simply to be there. The positioning of someone who understood, without being told, what proximity communicated. Well, William said. Better than nothing, Adrian said. Possibly better than that in time. William considered this. That's good, he said. The herons were better than I remembered, too. Sometimes things improve. Adrian looked oriented toward the boy. You went to the park. Thomas took me while you were aside, William said without apology. There were 4 herons, and a heron is never less than excellent. The corner of Adrian's mouth. Then Eleanor's. Then brief and real and unguarded in the middle of a London street, with Thomas standing 3 feet behind them, and Fenwick's card in Adrian's hand, and Friday's meeting still ahead of them, a smile. From both of them, at the same moment, directed at the same small serious boy, who had decided that hope was simply a matter of not closing your eyes to evidence. Eleanor reached for Adrian's arm without thinking. He did not startle. He simply turned his hand so that her hand was in it, and they stood on the street in the October cold, and William was already explaining the herons in considerable detail, and for a moment one specific, contained, entirely real moment, none of the rest of it existed at all. Friday arrived the way difficult things arrive when you have spent 2 days preparing for them, faster than expected, and with a specific quality of stillness that meant the preparation was over and the thing itself had begun. Pelham's office was in a building on a quiet street that communicated, through its architecture and the precise arrangement of its waiting room, that the work done here was serious and that the people who came here understood it was serious. Eleanor registered this when they arrived and filed it the way she filed everything, as information about what she was dealing with. Not a reason to be intimidated by it. Graves was already there. He had arrived 20 minutes early, which was exactly what she had expected of him, and he had used the time to arrange 3 chairs on their side of the table, in the particular way that said we came prepared, not we came anxious. Adrian sat in the center chair, Eleanor to his right, Graves to his left. Pelham came in with Caroline's brother, Edward Barlow, and a second man she did not recognize who carried a leather case and sat without being introduced, which told her he was there to take notes and had been told to be unobtrusive about it. She noted the case. She noted its size. Edward Barlow was perhaps 45, with the kindling faint face that had probably been pleasant before whatever combination of grief and purpose had set it into its current arrangement. He looked at Adrian when he sat down, and she watched him process what he saw: the dark glasses, the careful way Adrian oriented toward sound rather than sight. He had not known then, or had not believed it was still true. "Thank you for meeting with us," Pelham said. He had the smoothed manner of a solicitor who had conducted these conversations many times, and understood that the manner was as important as the words. "Of course," Graves said. "We will be direct," Pelham said. "Lord Barlow has in his possession correspondence from his sister, indicating that in the weeks before her death, she had reason to believe that the Duke of Whitmore had concealed from her and from the marriage itself the fact that his sight was recovering. She described this as a fundamental misrepresentation of the circumstances under which the marriage was maintained." He set a letter on the table. Eleanor looked at it. "Did not touch it. She also wrote," Pelham continued, "that she intended to seek legal counsel regarding the grounds for a formal separation, and that she had spoken to her personal maid about the circumstances." He paused. "The maid has confirmed this account." "We are aware," Graves said. Pelham looked at him. "You are aware." "We are aware of the circumstances Lady Caroline discovered," Graves said. "The Duke has been prepared to address them directly. That is why we are here." Pelham glanced at Barlow's expression shifted not much but enough. He had expected denial as the first position. The absence of it had disrupted his sequence. Eleanor filed this. "Then you acknowledge," Pelham said carefully, "that there was a concealment." "I acknowledge," Adrian said, "that I did not tell my wife when my sight began partially returning." "That is accurate." He said it with the complete steadiness of a man who had decided 2 days ago in Graves's office that the truth said plainly was the only position worth occupying. "I did not tell her because I was not certain the recovery was permanent, and then because I did not know how to begin the conversation, and then because I waited too long and the waiting became its own problem." The room was quiet. "I understand," Adrian said, "that this caused her to feel deceived. I understand that she left because of it. I have lived with both of those facts for 3 years." He paused. "What I did not do, what I want to be entirely clear about, is cause the accident that killed her. I did not know she was leaving on that road on that night. No one did. She told no one her route because she did not want to be followed." His voice remained level throughout. "Those are different things. The concealment is mine. The accident was not." Barlow had been very still. Now he moved a sharp, forward movement, the movement of someone who has been holding something back and has reached the limit. "You let her think. You were completely blind," he said. Not to Graves, not to Pelham, directly to Adrian, for years. "She stayed because she believed you needed her. She structured her entire life around a man who was—" "Edward." Pelham placed a hand briefly on the man's arm. Barlow stopped. His jaw was tight. His hands on the table were flat, pressed down, the posture of someone holding himself in place. Eleanor looked at him, this man who had lost his sister, and spent 3 years deciding who was responsible, and she understood something she had not fully understood before entering the room. He was not here for the land. The land was real. The inquiries were real. But the man in this chair was not primarily a man who wanted property. He was a man who had watched his sister's marriage from the outside, and had seen something that looked like imprisonment, and when she died, he had needed it to be someone's fault. And the person who had been closest to her was the only available answer. She looked at Adrian. He was facing slightly toward Barlow's voice. The glasses made it impossible to know exactly where his attention was directed, but she knew she had learned, in 6 weeks, to read him that he was giving Barlow the full, complete attention he gave to things that mattered. "Mr. Barlow," Eleanor said. Both Barlow and Pelham looked at her. She had not spoken until now. She had been listening, which was the most useful thing she could do in the first part of a conversation like this, and she had been watching, which was how she had arrived at the understanding she now needed to act on. "I am going to tell you something that my husband has not said," she said. "Not because he does not know it, because it is easier for someone who was not in the marriage to say it plainly." Barlow looked at her. She held his gaze steadily. "Caroline did not stay because she had no choice," Eleanor said. "She stayed for 3 years after the accident, after the diagnosis, because she chose to. That is in every letter she wrote in those 3 years, if you read them carefully rather than looking for evidence of a particular conclusion." She paused. She was unhappy in the marriage before the accident. I do not know the details of that unhappiness, but the blindness did not cause it. The blindness gave her a reason to stay that felt more manageable than the real reasons she was struggling, and she used it because it was available. That is not my husband's fault, and it is not hers. It is simply what people do when the true difficulty is harder to name than the visible one. The room was completely quiet. Pelham was looking at her with the expression of a man recalibrating. Barlow was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately classify, something between anger and the specific pain of a person hearing something they did not want to hear because it was too close to something they had already suspected. "You did not know my sister," he said. "No," Eleanor said. "But I have read her letters, the ones she sent to my husband's estate manager in the months before the accident. They are in the estate's correspondence records." She looked at him steadily. She was not writing as a woman imprisoned. She was writing as a woman who did not know what she wanted and was using a manageable problem to avoid an unmanageable one. She paused. "I am sorry. I know that is not what you came here to hear." Barlow looked at the table. His hands had relaxed slightly, not relaxed exactly, but the pressing down quality had changed. Something had shifted in the quality of his stillness. "Pelham," he said. "Yes," a pause. "Step outside for a moment." Pelham looked at him, then at Graves. Then he stood, smoothly, with the professional composure of a man accustomed to being asked to leave rooms at particular moments, and he went. The note-taker followed without being told. Graves looked at Eleanor. She gave him the smallest nod. He stood and went to the window and became very interested in the street outside, which was the particular professional courtesy of a solicitor giving his client a private conversation. Barlow and Adrian and Eleanor sat at the table. "She wrote to me," Barlow said. "The week before. She said she had found something out, and she did not know what to do with it, and she needed to think." "Yes," Adrian said. "She did not say what it was. She said she would write again when she had decided." He stopped. "She did not write again." "I know," Adrian said quietly. Barlow looked at him, the full, direct look of a man who has been building a case for 3 years and is standing in the moment where the case either holds or it doesn't. "Did you love her?" The question landed in the room with the weight of everything behind it. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I respected her," he said. "I was grateful to her. I believed for a time that those things were sufficient." He paused. "I do not think I knew then what love actually required. I thought it was a condition that existed. I did not understand it was a choice that had to be made repeatedly." He turned very slightly toward Eleanor. The fractional adjustment she knew was sight and instinct combined. "I understand that now. I did not then." Barlow looked at Eleanor. "You are not what I expected," he said. "I am told that frequently," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want from this meeting?" "The truth to be on the record," she said. "Not a version of it, the actual account. That your sister discovered a concealment, that she chose to leave, that the accident was an accident, and that no one in this room caused it." She held his gaze. "I also want you to stop looking for someone to be responsible for something that had no single responsible person. Because I think you know, and have known for some time, that the answer is more complicated than a name." His jaw tightened, held released, "And the land," he said, "is not connected to this meeting," Eleanor said. "If you wish to make an offer for the eastern parcel through the appropriate channels, my husband will consider it as he would consider any other offer. On its merits, not as part of this." Barlow looked at Adrian. "Is that true?" "It is what she said," Adrian said. "She speaks for both of us in this room." A pause that was long enough to mean something. Then Barlow looked at the door Pelham had gone through. Then back at the table. He picked up Caroline's letter, the one Pelham had placed between them, and he looked at it for a moment, and then he folded it and put it in his own pocket. "I will tell Pelham we have reached an understanding," he said. "Thank you," Eleanor said. He stood. He looked at Adrian one more time, the complicated look of a man who came in with one feeling and is leaving with a different one that does not yet have a name. "She would have liked you," he said to Eleanor. She had no patience for people who managed around things. Then he went to the door and opened it, and his voice in the corridor told Pelham that the situation had been resolved. They were in the carriage for 10 minutes before anyone spoke. William had been left at the townhouse with Thomas, and had, according to the note, Thomas pressed into Eleanor's hand as they left. spent the morning reorganizing the books in the townhouse library by a system he had developed himself and intended to explain in detail at the first available opportunity. Adrian sat across from Eleanor with his hands on his knees and his face turned slightly toward the window, and she let the silence be what it needed to be, which was the particular silence of someone who has been through something significant and needs to sit in the aftermath before they can speak about it. He was not what I expected, Adrian said finally. No, she agreed. I expected someone who wanted to win. He paused. He wanted to understand. Yes, she said, he did. What you said about Caroline using a manageable problem instead of an unmanageable one. He stopped. That was true, I know. How did you know? Because I recognized it, she said. I have done versions of it myself. Most people have. She looked at him across the carriage. It is easier to stay in a situation that is difficult in a way you can name than to leave for reasons that are harder to explain. He was quiet. She was unhappy before the accident. I think so. I think the marriage was not what either of you needed, and you were both too committed to your respective duties to say so. She paused. That is not a fault, it is a circumstance. I caused part of her unhappiness, he said. The concealment, the distance, the way I managed everything around me so completely that there was no room for anything I had not already accounted for. He said it as a statement, not a confession-seeking response. I know that. Yes, she said. And you have been carrying it for 3 years, and you will carry some part of it forward, because some things do not fully put down. But carrying it is different from being defined by it. She held his gaze. You are not that man anymore. He looked toward her. Because of you, she said. I moved a lamp 14 degrees. You did the rest. The carriage moved. The city outside continued its own business, entirely indifferent to what had just been resolved in a quiet office on a quiet street. Eleanor, he said, yes. When we returned to Whitmore Hall, he said, I would like to open the rooms in the East Wing. She understood what he meant. The rooms that had been Caroline's. The rooms that had been closed for 3 years, maintained but sealed, preserved in the particular way of things that no one has decided what to do with, yet. Yes, she said. When you are ready, I think I am ready, he said. Not to forget, I do not want to forget, but to stop keeping the door closed because I do not know what else to do with the room. That is exactly the right reason to open it, she said. He nodded. Then the eastern parcel, I meant what I said. If Barlow makes an offer on its merits, consider it on its merits. It is worth more than he will offer. Probably, she said. But that is a separate conversation from this one, and you are in a better position to have it from a place of choice than from a place of defense. She paused. If you sell it because it is the right decision for the estate. If you keep it for the same reason. You have an opinion. I have several, I will share them when you ask. The corner of his mouth. I am asking. Keep it, she said. The water access is too valuable, and the northern tenancies are the most stable income the estate has. Selling it to resolve a conflict that has already been resolved by other means is a bad trade. She paused. But extend Barlow a courtesy offer on a smaller adjacent parcel if one exists. It costs you little, and it closes the door on his interest in the larger one more neatly than a refusal would. He was quiet for a moment. Thomas said, last month, that there was a field on the northern boundary that was producing inconsistently and might be better managed by the neighboring property. Then offer that one, she said, at fair value. You managed this from the beginning, he said. The meeting, the position. You knew what he actually wanted before we walked in. I did not know, she said. I thought it was likely. There is a difference. And if I had been wrong? He said. If he had wanted to pursue it formally regardless. Then Graves would have handled it, she said. And we would have told the truth in a magistrate's room instead of a solicitor's office, and the outcome would have been the same, only slower and more expensive. He turned toward her fully. You were not frightened. I was focused, she said. We have established the distinction. He was quiet for a long moment. The carriage turned, and the motion shifted him slightly, and she watched his hand move automatically, without thought, to the strap beside the door. The habitual gesture of someone navigating movement without full sight. He did it without self-consciousness, now in front of her, which was different from the first weeks when every accommodation had been careful and private. She thought about 11 degrees, about teacups moved 6 inches. About a man who had spent 4 years building a life that was functional and complete and entirely without anyone in it who was allowed to see the building process. She thought about William on a London street, explaining herons to a man who could see their shapes against the water and needed a small, serious boy to tell him the details. She thought about Thomas, reorganizing his notes the previous evening, with the specific focused energy of a man who had been given an accurate information for the first time, and was recalibrating everything with the relief of someone who has been working from a flawed map and has finally been handed the correct one. She thought about Fenwick's card in Adrian's coat pocket. 3 weeks. They begin then. What are you thinking? Adrian said. That we should go back, she said. William has reorganized the library and needs to explain his system, and Thomas has at minimum 4 new schedules to review with you, and I want to see the East Wing when we return to Whitmore Hall. The East Wing, he said. Together, she said, when you are ready. There is no urgency. He was quiet. Eleanor, yes. I want to tell you something. He said it in the careful way. He said things he had been turning over for a while. Not as a statement of fact, as I am not certain what it is actually. I have not said it before. She waited. In 22 years of managing this estate, he said, I have made every decision by calculating what the situation required. Not what I wanted, what the situation required. A pause. I did not believe before October that those were different questions. And now, she said, now I am aware, he said, that there is a version of this life, the life in that house, with that boy, with Thomas and Bess and Mrs. Harding and all the rest of them that I want, not because the situation requires it. Because I want it specifically. He turned toward her. And you are the center of that version. She looked at him for a long moment. Not because you fixed anything, he said quickly. I know you will say you didn't. I was going to say, she interrupted quietly, that I know. He stopped. I know, she said again. I have known for some time. And I have been waiting, not because I was uncertain, but because you needed to arrive at it yourself. In your own sequence. She looked at his face, the familiar architecture of it, the jaw and the careful mouth, and the glasses that were not now purely necessary, but had become simply part of how he moved through the world. I am also at the center of that version, in case you needed to know that. He reached across the space between them. His hand found hers without searching, with the accuracy that was part memory and part something else, the particular accuracy of someone who has learned, over 6 weeks, the geography of another person. She turned her hand over and held his. They rode the rest of the way in the silence that was not absence Ken's, but presence, the full, particular presence of 2 people who have come through something together and are sitting in what comes after. When they returned to Whitmore Hall, William was in the entrance hall waiting. He had not been told to wait there. He had simply decided that the entrance hall was where they would arrive, and therefore where he should be, which was the specific logic of a child who has decided that a place is home and acts accordingly. He looked at both of them. Then he said, with the directness that was purely his own, it went well. Yes, Eleanor said. I could tell from the carriage, he said. You were sitting differently. Adrian turned toward the boy's voice. Differently how? More relaxed, William said. Uncle Adrian, you hold your shoulders up when something is unresolved. Right now they are lower. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, you are going to be exhausting when you are older. My father said the same thing, William said, without any indication that he considered this a criticism. He said it fondly. I said it fondly, Adrian said. William considered this. Then I reorganized the library. I need to show you the system after dinner, Eleanor said. It is an excellent system, he said, but conceded the point and went toward the dining room without argument, which was, she had learned, William's version of agreement. Thomas appeared from the corridor and looked at both of them with the brief, assessing efficiency that told her he had already registered the quality of their return and had drawn the correct conclusion. I will have the accounts ready in the morning, he said. And I have begun the revised schedule for the daily routine based on our conversation in London. Thank you, Thomas, Adrian said. Thomas moved to go. Then stopped. Your Grace, yes. I reorganized the stones on the desk this morning, Thomas said. To account for the lamp position. He paused. The new arrangement is 4 inches to the left of the previous one. I wanted to tell you directly rather than have you discover it. Adrian was quiet for a single beat. Then thank you, Thomas. Thomas nodded and was gone. Eleanor looked at the entrance hall, the high ceiling, the staircase curving upward, the walls where portraits hung in full view. She looked at the door to the east corridor, closed as it had always been. Then she looked at Adrian. Not tonight, he said before she spoke. Tomorrow morning, in good light. Tomorrow morning, she agreed. They went to dinner, and William explained his library system, which was organized by a combination of subject matter and what he called urgency of interest, which was a category that he acknowledged was subjective but maintained was nonetheless more useful than alphabetical. Adrian listened to the full explanation with the complete, genuine attention he gave to things he had decided were worth his time, and he asked 2 questions that made William's face do the thing it did when he felt himself taken seriously. And Eleanor ate her dinner and watched both of them and thought about the specific, unremarkable miracle of a table with 3 people at it who were choosing to be there. Later, after William had gone to bed and Thomas had confirmed the morning schedule, she found Adrian in the study. He was not working. He was simply present in the room, standing near the window in the way she had learned to recognize as him looking, actually looking, at the world outside. She came and stood beside him. "Can you see the garden?" she said. "The general shape of it," he said. "Movement when the wind moves the trees." He paused. "There is a light on in the cottage at the far edge of the grounds. Thomas keeps late hours. He always has," she said. "He told me he does his best thinking after 9. He told me the same thing once," Adrian said, "years ago." A pause. "I had forgotten." She stood beside him and let the quiet be what it was, and after a while he said, very quietly, "In the morning. The East Wing, I want you to come with me. I will be there," she said. "I do not know what I will feel," he said, "when we open the door." "I want you to know that going in, I know," she said. "I will not ask you to feel anything specific. I will simply be there." He turned toward her, the full attention. Then, in the specific, deliberate way he did things he decided were worth doing, the way he had reached for her hand in the carriage, the way he had pulled out a chair for Mrs. Harding to sit while he spoke to her properly, for the first time last week, the way he had knelt to William's level on the 3rd day, to show him the map of the estate. He reached up and removed the dark glasses. She looked at him, not the managed, composed surface. The actual face beneath it, older than the composure suggested, and more human, and with the specific quality of someone standing without the thing they have used for protection for a long time, deciding whether what is underneath is enough. "I can see your outline," he said. "Your hair, the shape of you." A pause. "Not your face clearly, not yet. That is all right," she said. "Fenwick thinks in time." "I know what Fenwick thinks," she said. "I also know that whether he is right or wrong, this is enough. What is here right now is enough." He looked at her, looked, with what he had, with the shapes and the light, and the 18 months of recovery, and the particular attention of a man who had learned, before he could see, to be fully present with the person in front of him. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes, thank you for moving the cup," he said. She understood exactly what he meant, and everything it contained, the 6 inches, and the 11 degrees, and the 14, and the East Wing door they would open in the morning, and William explaining herons on a London street, and Thomas's reorganized stones, and a solicitor's office where the truth had been told plainly, and the room had not collapsed. "You reached for it," she said. "I just put it where your hand was going." He smiled, not the corner of his mouth, not the almost. The full, unmanaged, entirely real smile that she had been seeing more frequently in the past weeks, the one that was simply his face doing what it did when something was genuinely good. She smiled back, knowing he could see enough to know she was. They stood in the quiet study, in the house that was theirs, and was warm in every room that mattered, and neither of them said anything else, because they had arrived, together, at the place where nothing else needed to be said.